Well, hey, thank you everyone for making time today. We're excited to talk to you about Agentic AI for domain-specific test automation. I'm Adam Wendel, Customer Success and Renewal Manager here at LogiGear, joined by Tuan Truong, our Senior Director of Technology and Head of Product of TestArchitect. Today we're talking about Agentic AI, for domain-specific test automation. It's a very key word there. We're all about scaling test automation with Agentic AI and codeless design. From our perspective and the solutions that we're seeing in the market, we're really trying to bridge a gap that we're seeing between the generic LLMs and actually specific SLMs that we can build for you, along with multi-agent and domain-tuned intelligence. Just funny remark, I'd say is, we're not really short on AI products and demos. If anything, the demos have demos. Today, we just really want to focus on the actual working solutions with real ROI. What we see is there's really an ROI crisis. Everybody's talking about what AI can do for them, but actually seeing real ROI is not always taking note, and actually costs are rising. So we're going to frame this as going from what we see as the problem, the architecture to serve the problem, and then we're going to talk about the features of how they help, and then we're going to talk about the real ROI that we're seeing in projects today. You know, we're going to go from also speaking to hybrid LLM and SLM models. Don't worry, we're going to define that. And we're going to talk about agentic collaboration. We're going to talk about these features and how AI can actually work in the workflow with codeless design and how we measure that. So let's see why that matters. You know, we talked about the fact that there's so many demos and there's so many changes going in AI. Right now, a lot of teams are running into the same things. We have inconsistent outputs. You've got things that are hallucinating in your scripts, cost and latency issues, and there's model drift over time. The main point here is AI testing fails and it stays probabilistic. It's expensive and it's really hard to govern, often creating more problems than we have that it's solving. So, the real question is, the real question isn't really, can AI generate a test? It's, can AI generate reliable automation at scale, which is the challenge. So we really want test automation at scale, but why isn't it easy? Why does this break at scale? And often it's not because of lack of tools. There's a lot of tools in the market. It's really because reuse stops too early. UI reuse may exist, but workflow logic, business behavior just still get rebuilt again and again. The core issue here is just, it's not the tool, it's where the reusability stops. And I just want to demonstrate that a little bit in the workflow and defining how the reusability plays out. We've got the same goal, different implementation across different teams. It gets repeated over and over. And, in this case, we're just using 3 different test cases. We've got login, search, filter, checkout, and each time we're adding a different step. And we're adding to that. In page objects, they do help with UI reuse, but the workflow logic and business behavior still often get recreated test by test. And in that recreation is where we have the issue. As the process repeats itself over time, it's just going to become more and more complex. And the key being less reusable, which means more costly and less time. So really, that's going to bring us to the next step. Let's talk about the engineering solution. And in the engineering solution, we want to talk about hybrid LLM and SLM architecture. To make AI useful in production, we really need to treat it as an engineering problem. That means choosing the right model for the right task, combining reason with precision, and grounding the output in the actual test assets. So just want to tell you a little more, and we're going to hand it over to Tuan to get in more specifics. LLMs are powerful. They're for reasoning, interpreting ambiguous intent, but they're not always the best choice for repeated automation step. Custom SLMs can be faster, more deterministic, and more cost-effective, better aligned with structured tasks. The point is, LLMs are good for reasoning. SLMs bring domain precision and repeatability. So Tuan, why don't you join us here? Why do we need both here? And maybe just comment a little bit about, why not just use one big powerful LLM for everything?
Sure, Adam. So we need both. And honestly, if just use a powerful LLM is exactly what the most AI demo do. But in the production grade, it doesn't work for three reasons. Firstly, determinism. As you know that the LLM can hallucinate, right? The same prompt can give you a slightly different task tomorrow. So that's fine for brainstorming, but it's unacceptable for the reflection task, right? Where you need the same input to produce the same result every single run. Secondly, cost and latency. The task workflows isn't a one call, it's a hundred or even thousand of small and repeat steps. So, for example, like select an action, file a locator, or map a keyword, routing every one of those in a large language model. It could be very slow and very expensive, right? It's scaled
Mm.
in the wrong way. So the longer your task, the worse it gets. So third, and I think it is a very important point. Most of those steps don't need deep reasoning. They need accuracy, consistency. So that's why we use LLM for interpreting ambiguous and general user intent. But for structure and repetitive works, it's much better to use a custom small language model that is trained on the customer old task asset, can run on CPU and give the same answer every time. So it is also a decoding choice. So we run
Mm.
SOM at low temperature, near greedy. So the token selections is effectively fixed and the LOM stay in the higher temperature because there we actually want the very reasoning. I'll show you exactly um, on the
Yeah,
next.
we're gonna get into more of the details, just defining the difference between these two. One thing that's hiding right here that some of you may be experiencing, some of you may not yet, but the CPU friendly and no GPU farm required. This is a key cost related to the rising cost with using AI in the generic LLMs. The more use you go on over time, the more tokenization, higher cost. SLM strategy. This is something you can build on with high reusability. It doesn't have this rising cost at scale. So Tuan, can you tell us a little bit more about the custom LLM versus generic LLMs?
Sure. Yep. The difference between the custom model and generic ones isn't intelligent. It's context. A generic model knows language and domain tool understand your system, your application. So any chance, that it make it could be, the quality, improve the quality directly. So a generic model tend to generate a low-level script that still need cleanup and maintenance, and a custom model generate a reusable, executable step already aligned with your framework, right? Your automation framework. So the way we get there is training project-specific data. Yeah, and we also use RAG, retrieval augmented generation, to vectorize the customer real assets like action libraries, test case, interface definition, workflows. So instead of hallucinating a function, the AI retrieve the real and reusable component that the team already chose. Um, and for a lot of enterprise customer, like finance, healthcare, or energy, the data privacy matters as much as accuracy. So that's why those model can run on-prem or inside a private cloud. So the data never leave their control.
Yeah, that's a really big one. And I think that's one reason why in the QA space as a whole, it's one of the reasons that we don't see AI and strategies at a high level. And SLMs is a way to really just keep everything close knit and private. Also, one of the other points here, I think that's a really good one to mention is just the higher elaborate prompts that are required. When you're working on QA testing, you're going to start getting prompts that get very detailed. If you're not working with an SLM, you're going to have to keep refeeding it a lot of knowledge and complex LMs. One thing I would ask you, Tuan, is, what's the biggest blind spot, when it comes to looking at these things? What's something that you've noticed that people don't see?
The biggest blind spot, I think, it is assuming that the AI model is the most important one. It
Mm,
is. I think the data is right. Most of the team get excited about which LLM, the tool that they pick, like Cloud, Record, or Copilot, or Gemini, and under-invest in preparing their own
mm,
assets,
right,
clean action library, consistent interface definition, a well-structured test case. So if the foundation is messy, even if you have a good AI tool, AI model, it still produce a messy output, like garbage in, garbage out. And the team that success treat their existing test assets as a first class data product. So the quality isn't set by the model. It's set by the quality of domain data that you crowd it in. So that exactly that we will talk about in
right. And what you're talking about is just setting the foundation. You're building your own knowledge base along with your AI, and with the generic LLMs, you're just not going to get that. And I know in the next slide, let's get into the process of how we create that.
Yep. Cool. Yeah. And this slide is everything about that happened before the AI generation, right? Uh,
Mm,
so you can see at the step one, we analyze the existing project assets and really like action library, test case, interface definition, workflow documentation. So we define descriptions of the key entities and build data sets, and even that we can leverage ALM to help to generate more training example. As step two, we normalize and vectorize those assets into embedding and store them in a vector database. And that's the RAG operation that lets the AI do semantic search over the customer real components. At step three, we generate script and run business training, reviewing results, applying hybrid training, drag plus the low ranking adaptation fine-tuning, plus the human feedbacks and capture the business context flows. Then step four, we update, validate the data model, and then deploy it. So I think here is the most important thing. The training doesn't stop at the deployment. Every review, every correction, every approval or rejection from subject matter expert becomes feedback that the system learn from. So over time, the AI keeps getting more aligned with domain knowledge, actual standard of automation framework behavior, which is very essential because enterprise applications are constantly evolving.
right. Which goes back to reusability. And I think the point that Tuan's making here is just continuous training. It's just part of the everyday work. It's like a coworker you're bringing alongside of you, or you're just always having your best up-to-date tools to come right along and work with you. And I guess one question for the group I think is important to recognize, Tuan, is, who owns this training process? How's it managed?
It's a partnership, Adam. So early on, our AI team does a heavy lifting, like analyzing the vectorization and first fine-tuning, working with customer QA leads and SMEs because they know what correct look like in their framework. Then it's shipped to them day to day. It's managed through the human in the loop, and every review and correction from their SMEs feedback, the training loop, right? So they are not running training jobs, just doing their normal review work, and the system learn from it. So we own the setup, and their expert own the direction, and the feedback loop run day to day.
Yeah. So it can look complex, 4 steps, but it's actually very simple. The more knowledgeable your engineers and our team combined, we're going to help you enter that information. We're going to show you how to maintain it, and really it compounds and it's easy over time. Next, I want to go ahead and talk about some of the things that come from the benefits. Once we've got the setup complete, it's knowledge, domain knowledge is put into the program here, and this is all going to translate to the quality of the output. Generic AI can assist, but custom domain tuned AI can really align with how your team actually works. And that's that knowledge base Tuan was talking about over time that builds. You know, the four key benefits as we see them is just, the domain specific understanding. The model understands your actual application, your workflows, UI patterns, business terminology, reusable testing logic. So instead of generating scripts, the AI starts thinking in your team's language. The other parts here is just reusable automation assets. I think this is a big one that is just hard to create. Rather than creating automation from scratch every time, kind of like you're creating your prompts, these AI agents reuse stable, high-level business actions. And the keywords are actually already trusted by the team are in there. This dramatically reduces maintenance cost and improves long-term stability, which we're going to allude to in a little more specific ROI later. And then finally, we talked about data security and enhanced coverage. Many enterprise customers that we see, you can't just put QA assets into the public AI services. Now, because the SLM is lightweight, CPU friendly, you can run everything on-prem, inside a private cloud, fully isolated out environments. And, this just makes so your test data, workflow, defect information, all stay under your control, which is critical. And at the end of all this, we're just really going to enhance automation coverage. Once the AI understands the framework, reusable assets, teams can automate faster across UI, API, database workflow. So, with the hybrid solution, the result is going to be much more stable, scalable, and enterprise-friendly automation. And another question I just want to hit on here, Tuan, is, you know, of these benefits, what are you seeing as the most popular and maybe one of the most challenging that people are seeking that they're not getting?
It's very interesting because the most popular and the most challenging two different pillars. So the most popular, I think, is the reviewable automation assets. That's
Sure.
the one that make people lean in because every team depends of rebuilding the same login, same source, same workflow over and over. So when they see the AI composing from stable, just like high-level action instead of generating from scratch, why the most challenging is the first pillar here, getting the model. It truly understand the customer application, not because the technology is hard, but it depends on the quality and the consistency of their existing assets. So if action library is clean and well structured, it's very fast. If it's consistent, inconsistent, and thinly documented, that's where the real work is. So it's exactly why the data training process we so really matter, Adam.
Yeah, that's good. And I know from a lot of our projects where we've been working with clients for a longer period of time, our engineers as a part of that team with the domain knowledge, that's where they're really seeing some benefits over time because of that. We've talked about agents, we've talked about what they can do and how we can train them. Now we want to go from single model guessing to orchestration. Okay. And orchestration is a word that's being thrown around a lot. You're going to hear it a lot. But what that really just means is agentic collaboration, how these agents are all doing their job and then working together. And we talked a little bit about the rising cost and scale. And again, this is where tokenization costs can really start to ramp up in a single model use case. And that's going to limit your ROI, if not really hurt it. The point here I just want to make is, reliability is going to improve when when AI work is broken into specialized agents that do their jobs. So, let's talk a little bit more about agentic AI. Instead of one model guessing, we want to break it into these specialized steps. Okay, what are these agents or what are these steps that we want to create? It's understanding, it's mapping, it's selecting, reviewing, and improving. These are all activities that we want to do every day as an engineer or as a manager we want to see from our team. And what does that mean on a little more detailed level? Deep understanding just means testing in plain language. We want to break up complex workflows into clear atomic user actions. Uh, and when it comes to action mapping, each step can go to predefined actions. Again, this is reusability. And this keeps consistent with your keyword driven framework. That's so important. When it comes to accurate locator and self-healing, specialized agents can actually select, validate, and heal locators from your interface definitions. And that's going to reduce your flaky tests. And then finally, the self-improving automation. Agents can validate each other. They're going to produce tests that are reliable, reusable, and aligned with enterprise practices. Next, Tuan's going to walk through what these agents actually look like in an architecture.
Yes. So yeah, thank you, Agentic AI. Right? It helped the test automation solution a lot. And if you look at the full orchestration architecture here, it looks very busy. But let me trace one path through it to like a user start with an input like a manual test case, acceptance criteria, or natural language requirement. So then it goes the land graph orchestrator, right? So with the conductor for everything else. Land graph matters because it model the workflows as a stateful graph instead of the linear problem. Agent become nodes and transition become asset. And the stack is clearly preserved between steps. So it's a little bit technical, but that's what gives us retries, branchings, share memory, human checkpoint, and iterative refinement. Those you cannot get from single prompt and response. So from there, yeah, the orchestrator has to work to the test case generation agent. Is the super agent includes a multiple sub agent here. So you can see the step splitter break the request into atomic step, and the action selectors, one of the user defined action, one for built-in action, map each step, to something already exists in your framework, right? And the test step analyzer check that if the PS fit together, and if of these are separate, inspect table node agent with exactly why the system is debuggable, right? And in a way that's a single box agent or model never is. So now here's the key detail. At every one those step, the agent issue a RAG query against the vector database. That database whole embedding of your real project assets, right? Like action library interface definition. So the generation isn't the model guessing from memory. It grounded in your actual current project knowledge. So that's different between inventing a function and retrieving one that already exists. So here reasoning calls go out to the LLM surface. So it's we use OpenAI here, but you can use the other one. So when integration need the custom LLM here like LLM 3 that we are using with the LoRa fine tuning handle the structure high volume execution. Then the review agent validate the result before anything is finalized. So and the loop that make this improve over time. The training agent you can see on the right side, the training service take correction and approval and fit them back into the domain tool, right? Fine tune loop. So the system isn't static. So every project, takes it to be more accurate on the next one. Yeah.
Yeah. And, it can look like there's a lot going on here, but there's really just four key parts. As a whole, you've got your knowledge base, you got your LLM where everything's contained, all the information. In the middle, then you have all these working agents that are doing things. And those agents aren't just generic agents. They're actually trained on specific domain information that you give it. And then on the top of that, I would just think of it as a dashboard. That's what TestArchitect Genie, in this case, the tool is acting as a UI to make it easier for you to organize around all that information.
Yeah.
And when you look at this, you know, everybody's wondering, where does the human really fit in here? Like, what's the key inputs that everybody still contains in?
Yeah, the answer, I think, the human isn't only at the end, right? Because they will be at every single step that you can see that the agent or the nodes here, so they can get the feedback right away. Yep.
Right. Yep. So that you're a part of the whole process, but at the end of the day, a lot of these agents are doing the work for you, and then you're overseeing the output and refining it.
Yep.
Okay, so this is a good one. We're gonna go from architecture then to talking more about how we all stay in the loop and how we orchestrate or we work with AI. AI proposes and SME governs. SME being you or your engineer team. That human in loop point is key. The goal here is not blind AI test generation. It's about getting faster, better guided automation with domain experts in control. Now Tuan's gonna just show a little bit more about what that means in action.
Yeah. First, the structure drag, right, or retrieval or osmotic generation. Before the AI generate anything, it retrieve the real project assets, and so the output is grounded, right, in the actual project knowledge, and not just model memory. So that's the anti hallucination layer. The AI isn't inventing functions; it's retrieving and reusing component that already exist in the framework. So so if we already fine-tune the model, so the question is, why do we still need RAG? Because that's so different problem, right? So LoRa or low ranking adaptation fine-tuning here, it takes the model, the domain knowledge, right? The workflows, the automation structure. But RAG keep it current. Project evolve model every week. So the strategy, um, because you cannot retrain the model every week, right? So the strategy is fine-tune the domain intelligence and retrieve continuously the real-time project accuracy. So second, the human in the loop on the right side, what we call it benevolent dictator
Hmm.
model. A domain expert gives the pass or fail at any step. So at any level, if one step wrong, you rerun that step and you don't throw away the whole task, right? So iterative refinement, not plan generation. So as you can see, the headline of the slide say it all AI proposed, but SME govern. Adam.
Yeah, and that's a lot of different details here, and I guess when it comes to this information, what are teams struggling with, in this transition of understanding where the SME is working with in this new structure and the things we want to avoid.
Yep. I think the one that most valuable and most overlooked is action-based authoring, right? The
Mm,
capturing workflow logic as a reusable access, not just recording UI click, something like that. So most
mm,
team think that headline feature is no code, low code. That's very good for adoption. But the deeper value is what the action-based authoring does for everything downstream. So when a workflow like a login, a search, or checkout is captured once as a reusable high-level action, that become a foundation of this solution V1, right? AI solution V1. So the agent compose from those just action instead of generating the a very low level script every time. Yeah.
yeah, and I think you just want to try to draw two things together there, which are really good. Reusable actions and agents, which you're going to find they kind of work together and what they do.
Yep.
So, we've covered strategic idea here, and we've gone into the architecture. Next we're going to talk about the key features that help make it all possible. And the example that we're going to be using today is real world examples using TestArchitect. It's important to understand our solution is able to scale with other tools as well, which we have active in other projects. But for today's solution and the actual real ROI, it's all directly tied to TestArchitect. And what is TestArchitect? Some of you have used it, some of you may be aware of it, maybe not for others, but TestArchitect's LogiGear's homegrown automation platform. Built from 30 years of testing and automation experience, we built this because a lot of tools in the market just weren't working for our customers' needs. This tool itself is, again, it's just built on reliable, reusable automation scripts, and without getting stuck in complex scripting. As we go into key features, I just want to highlight, we do have additional webinars coming up to do a deep dive into these features and how they work. AI Genie test generation, for example, that's one people like a lot. Just know you can sign up for them, or if you want to speak directly, boy, we'd love to do that too. So let's just go ahead and move on, and let's talk a little bit more about TestArchitect Cloud. Tuan?
Yes, sure. Adam. So TestArchitect Cloud is the next generation of TestArchitect. So it's we design and develop based on action-based setting or another keyword-driven testing. So it's the tests are written in the no code, low code, right? It's plain English and everyone can understand without coding. And it support cross-platform coverage. And we hope that we have some more time, to introduce you about this tool. Yeah.
Yeah, the no code in plain English, that's one that works well for everybody, especially your BAs. And, I think at the end of the day, that just makes it easier to manage with cross-platform.
Yep.
So let's go into it a little bit more and talk about AI Genie test generation.
Yeah, the AI Genie is a part of TestArchitect Cloud, but it's like independent product, AI product. So the key feature of AI Genie is the test generation, right? So I think it's the most important feature of any AI tool for testing. So the AI Genie basically can it apply all of the solution that we just presented, and instead of like can generate the script into the control step control step level, like for example like click input validation. It can generate into a business step level. So that means that you can reuse any high level action or user-defined action that you have already existing, right? And every output can have a like review agent to get the input feedback from the team too. So
Yeah,
it's very high level. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean each of these are things that we would showcase in an actual demo. We'd love to show you. And I guess when you look at these three different things, Tuan, what is the most popular, or maybe like what people miss in their day to day that gets used a lot?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the most of the team think that the feature is no code, low code. But I think deeper understand that if we can because if we generate the test script and then we cannot control it, right, maintain it, so it's no way to do because the software changes every day, right? Developer also use AI to generate the code, so the code, the amount of code will increase significantly, right? So everything changes. And if you generate the script and you cannot maintain it, and you need to generate another other task from scratch, it could be nightmare, Adam.
No, we want to avoid that.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's just talk about the third capability that, is one of the key aspects, AI Genie and using it as a personal assistant. AI Genie itself can be your new user onboarding. It's kind of like just your handbook and getting an enablement of how you're going to use it. Power user acceleration. Well, just quickly referenceable, reusable things that you're going to be able to use in action. And then the most important thing and a common theme here with domain, well, project specific knowledge. And that's real action library interface definitions based on your standards. And what does that all create together? I just want to list some of the things here that you could talk about in the demos a little bit more, but AI Genie can actually help create test scenarios, test steps, go over expected results, structured automated test actions, reusable codeless test logic, and also it can even uh, create drafts for the QA team that they can review, refine, and run. It's a lot of different things, a lot of different features. We'd love to show them to you. Okay, so we've talked about the tools, we talked about the architecture, we've talked about how humans are involved in each step of this. But let's talk about how roles might be transforming and then how does AI impact each one. Real AI or ROI itself can be hard to measure. With this solution that we're proposing and what we're seeing active, these are going to be real ROI numbers that we're going to talk to later. Um, ROI itself within each role is about empowerment, right? So, with business analysts, typically they're going to be stuck in a coding wall, writing requirements, handoffs, and then waiting for results. When you implement this, they're going to be contributing in sprint automation in plain English using their domain expertise. They don't have to be an SME there either. And for developers, typically there are days when you're just spending script repetitive flows, you're doing logins and running through navigation in crude for each new feature. But after this, they're going to be building reusable action libraries for the whole team and the AI to use. And then finally, we want to talk about the manual tester, which is really going to be elevated to an SME. Before they'd be focusing on test execution, regression, repetitive work that doesn't really compound. And then after, we're going to be the SME. We're going to be setting quality standards, validating AI outputs, which is critical, right? That's the orchestration. And they're really going to be designing strategic test strategies based on their experience. Okay, so we're going to move from some of those ideas and we're going to begin talking about experiments and the actual results. We're going to talk about real POC numbers and real ROI from a current client experience. And, I think it's just important to take a step back and recognize where we're pulling this value from. We're not creating it with the AI just out of thin air. It's all already within your test base. Your test base holds the blueprint, for smarter automation. A meaningful portion of these test cases contains predictable, reusable sequences. This stat, which is a good one, 40% of typical test case is actually predictable, repeatable, and repeatable scaffolding that the AI can build for you. What this just means is that your test base has all this value with reusable steps, patterns, workflows, and domain knowledge. We're just trying to pull that out. And just these are some of the numbers we've seen after scaling up over time. And I just want to kind of really highlight the numbers here. They can seem high, but these are actual numbers from our projects that we're working on and the real benefits. So 62% of faster regression cycles. Okay, what does that mean? Well, that's 11 days down to 4, and that's using agents that are triage and rerunning failures autonomously. About 3.5 more defects are caught pre-production. Agents are generating edge case scenarios that we miss as engineers, and that's okay. Because now we're going to find them with escape defects dropping from 18 down to 5 per release. Pretty epic. And then most of all, how does that affect our QA cost over time? Well, we're going to still be working with the same team. We're just going to have more output and manual scripting hours redeployed to exploratory testing and design reviews. Tuan is going to talk a little bit more about the data training and feedback, but one thing I wanted to ask here from the group is, where do clients sense, I guess, the early ROI, if we have some solution like this, or, what's going to be the later ROI, that we're going to feel when we're in this?
Yeah, early or later. Whenever that the data training is done, that when it clicks, Adam, the model now knows their framework. So it generates a task and auto run, right, routing in their real action. So regression cycle, time reduce.
Okay. Regression cycles the one immediately where we're going to start to feel the change.
Yeah.
And what about later, the long term? I mean, what would you say is like, are we going to see more defects in the long term, or is it cost?
For sure, yeah, because it's we'll have to increase the productivity, right? So the team, will can design and generate more tests, add more tests than there in regression, and then for sure it will, get find more defects, and after regression, right? And the product can release early. Yeah.
I think that's just something when you compound what the impact somebody's having over time, and those costs just seem to say longer we go.
Yep.
So, we've talked a little bit about how roles are transforming working with AI. Now we want to talk about how are we going to feel that change itself? We've got the ROI, but what are we sensing in our day to day? Well, senior engineers are going to be moving off the regression treadmill. What you're going to be handling day to day or overnight is going to change. Also the release day anxiety is going to drop sharply. And based on some of the numbers that we're seeing, it's just the amount of defects, of course, are going to be caught a lot earlier. And then finally, developers, they're going to enjoy this because they're going to get feedback before lunch, not waiting till next week. And one of the key points here, I think, that's pretty amazing is just the full regression result falling from 38 hours to 3. Pretty epic numbers. And I guess, Tuan, I just want to ask again, when you're working with the teams on this solution, what team is experiencing the most change?
Yeah, honestly, I think the senior engineer and QA list feel it most, right? But it's very in very good way because they are the one who used to live with regression treadmill, right? Like
Hmm.
overnight runs, trials, the same script over and over, and manual tester chancellor. They grow into SME role, more like SME role, and defining the quality standard and validating AI output, do data training instead of just executing it. Yeah.
Sure. So in other words, I think you can also say, yeah, we're going to feel the change for good, but that's also going to be a little bit uncomfortable because it's going to change the way we work. And that's just something, the more we learn, the easier it gets.
Yeah, we need to adapt with that. Adapt.
And we really want to talk about here a little bit. We talked about what we've done as building the architecture, the how-to, and the features and the impacts that they have. So for anybody joining today, anybody watching or learning more about this, what can you do and how can we help? We could have a discovery workshop, no bowl, no slides. We just want to talk about what's going on with the pain that you have in your release. And we could do an assessment and we could talk about where those agents could make an initial difference first. Also, we're doing pilots. We could do a 30-day pilot just focused around one product. We could run alongside your current suite in a read-only mode. So nothing changes. There's no, uh, I guess, changes that are going to happen. It's just setting a baseline. We can have a target, and then we can get a report at the end of the month. And then finally, the longer view is how do we scale and embed this quarter by quarter, just rolling agentic test layer into the CI, training your team who owns it, and check in monthly with people, the numbers we spoke about earlier. So we'd love to talk you through that process more, explore solutions. We've got a little time here. I want to go ahead and get it over to Q&A, but Tuan, do you have any thoughts about that or any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want to add only one thing. So like everything we saw today, right? Build on TestArchitect, but the principle that we can apply for any automation framework like Playwright or Selenium and stuff like that. Adam, yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
good point. I want to make sure the solutions we're talking to, these are definitely we're tool agnostic. At the same time, we've built our own tool. We can work with anything, and we're happy to explore that with everybody. Okay,
Okay.
well, I think that about does it for our time. Really appreciate everybody joining us today. We'd love to connect with you later and join us on that journey of agentic AI. Thank you.